The gym felt different that afternoon. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier somehow, as if everyone knew this game carried more weight than an exhibition usually did. The banners on the walls hadn't changed. The floor still shone the same way it always did under the lights, but the feeling was unmistakable. This was Jackson's last game before CSAC. The Dragons were already dressed when they gathered near the bench, the familiar green jerseys pulling over shoulders that had grown stronger over the season. It was supposed to be a tune-up, one last chance to sharpen things before the tournament that mattered most. But the opponent made it complicated. They were the strongest school on the island. Everyone knew it. They had beaten the Dragons before, by 20 points, and they'd done it without their center, the player most people quietly agreed was their best. Tonight, he was back. Coaches talked in low voices before tip-off. They weren't worried about effort. They were worried about confidence. A bad result here, so close to CSAC, could linger. The last tournament had shown how thin the margins were, how games could swing either way depending on energy, belief, and intensity. This game, they knew, could either sharpen the Dragons or dull them. The whistle blew. The opening minutes were cautious. Too cautious. The Dragons moved the ball around the perimeter, passing up looks they would normally take without thinking. Early on, Jackson caught it on the wing and saw a narrow lane open. He drove, sold the fake, and lifted the center off his feet. But instead of finishing strong, he paused. Too close to the rim, with no space left, he tossed the ball upward awkwardly. It missed everything. The moment passed, and so did the chance. No one said anything, but everyone felt it. The Dragons weren't scared exactly, but they weren't free either. The opposition scored first, then again. Nothing flashy, just strong, efficient basketball. Their center made his presence known immediately, contesting shots, altering drives, setting screens that felt like walls. Jackson drifted for a stretch. He ran the floor, he defended, but when his moments came, he deferred. A pull-up he normally took became a pass. A drive turned into a reset. From the bench, the coaches watched closely. But they didn't call the timeout right away. They wanted to see if the team would settle on its own. But the energy stayed flat, and the body language crept inward. Shoulders dropped just a little. Voices on defense softened. Finally, the whistle. Timeout. The players gathered, breathing hard, sweat already marking the jerseys. Jackson bent forward, hands on knees, eyes on the floor. The coach didn't raise his voice. Instead, he waited until everyone looked up. This team, he said, nodding toward the other bench, is not to be feared. He let that sit. They're good. We know that. But they don't get to decide how we play. We do. He pointed to the court. You've been here before. You've earned the right to attack. Stop waiting. Stop looking for permission. Then more quietly, bring the intensity. Everything else will follow. Something shifted. Not all at once, but enough. When play resumed, the Dragons picked up full court for the first time. Hands were active, feet moved quicker, communication sharpened. Jackson pressed his man, forcing him to the sideline, then poked the ball loose just enough to disrupt the rhythm. On offense, the change was subtle, but clear. Jackson caught the ball again on the wing. This time he went. The drive wasn't clean. The big man stepped over, but Jackson absorbed the contact and went up anyway. The whistle blew. Free throws. He stood at the line, took a breath, and knocked them down. That trip mattered more than the points. It sent a message to his teammates, to the bench, to himself. Over the next stretch, Jackson kept attacking. His shots weren't falling. A layup rolled out, a jumper rattled off the rim, but he kept going. Each drive drew contact. Each whistle slowed the game just enough to let the Dragons reset. By the end of the game, He had made 11 of 13 free throws. Not glamorous, but crucial. The Dragons ran something new midway through the second quarter, an isolation set they'd only practiced a handful of times. It wasn't perfect in practice. Timing had been off. Spacing had needed work. But this time, it clicked. Jackson cleared out at the top. One hard dribble, a quick step back, space. The defender hesitated. Jackson rose for three. The shot didn't fall, but the defense collapsed just enough for the kick out on the next possession. Open look, basket. They ran it again later. Same look, different result. Confidence built in layers. The opposition responded as good teams do. Twice they turned up the pressure. Aggressive traps, quick hands, forcing mistakes. The Dragons turned the ball over. Passes sailed too high. Dribbles got picked. 8 unanswered points. The gym grew loud, but something was different this time. No panic. The Dragons huddled briefly on the floor, players talking to each other before the coaches even stood up. On the next possession, they slowed it down. Got a stop, then another. Jackson drove again. Missed, but got fouled. 2 more free throws. The run ended. Later, it happened again. Another burst from the opposition, another stretch where everything seemed to tilt away from the Dragons. And again, they fought back. Defensive intensity became their anchor. They took charges, they rotated hard, they contested every shot. Jackson grabbed a loose ball on the floor and slid it out to a teammate while still seated. The score stayed just out of reach. In the final minutes, fatigue set in. The opposition's experience showed. They executed when it mattered most. That the Dragons pushed, but the gap held. When the final buzzer sounded, the opposition's title, undefeated heading into the season's end, remained intact. The Dragons walked off tired, winded, but not defeated. The coaches met them near the bench. This time, there were smiles. "You fought," one coach said simply. Another nodded. "That's the intensity we need." They didn't talk about the score. They talked about response, about attacking despite intimidation, about staying together when momentum swung away. Jackson sat quietly, unlacing his shoes. His stat line wouldn't impress anyone who hadn't watched the game. The missed shots stood out more than the free throws. But he knew, and his teammates knew. This game had given them something. As they left the gym, the air felt lighter than it had before tip-off. CSAC loomed ahead, not as a threat, but as a challenge they were ready to meet. The Dragons hadn't won the game, but they had found their edge, and that mattered more.